Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best so you never miss an episode. Today, we're diving into a wild tale that starts with a wife planning to meet her lover for drinks, unaware that her husband will be back home early. This is just a glimpse into our story today, and we have 3 captivating narratives lined up for you, so sit back and enjoy. It was one of those gray days when the sky seemed to hold its breath. I had miscalculated the weather forecast. The rain had been light at first, but it was starting to pick up. I could feel the pressure in my joints rising, signaling the storm ahead. At 44, my body had developed a knack for sensing when the elements were about to turn nasty. By the evening, my joints were throbbing, and I even rolled up my pants to apply some ointment, knowing deep down that the rain was here to stay. Our construction crew had just wrapped up digging a pit for a large building. There was only some cleaning left in one corner, but our equipment had broken down, and a few guys had to climb onto the supports to finish the job by hand. Just as they completed the work, one of the workers slipped, skidding down the muddy slope. Luckily, he didn't break anything, but I could see the bruises forming, and I decided it would be best for him to call it a day. The worsening weather made the work too dangerous, and I had already made up my mind to shut things down for the day. As if on cue, the main developer, Chuck, rolled up at the site with the mayor of our small town in tow. They both noticed that people were trickling out and Chuck's usual displeasure was evident. "Why is everyone leaving? We've still got 3 hours left. We need to finish this today," he barked, his voice dripping with irritation. "The rain is making it too complicated," I replied, hoping to reason with him. "Someone could get hurt. I'm not paying you to watch the weather. You need to finish on time," Chuck snapped back, raising his voice for everyone to hear. Then he shouted to the crew, "Hey! Get back to work. I'll throw in a bonus if you manage to get everything done today." Our town was small, and job opportunities were scarce. Many of the guys felt the pressure to comply, so they started sliding back to their positions, even as the rain intensified. I couldn't just stand by and let them be mistreated, so I turned to the mayor, who was standing under his massive black umbrella, hiding his thinning hair. "Say something. You're the mayor. These people voted for you, and you're letting them be treated like this." "Oh, come on, John," he replied, dismissively. "It's just a little rain. What's the harm? They'll finish the job and head home." I hated their attitude towards the workers, but I was outnumbered. The officials' orders held more weight than mine, and the promise of money kept the men in line. But I was appointed foreman, and their safety was my responsibility. I couldn't just stand by as they struggled, risking their lives. As the weather continued to deteriorate, the wind picked up, and the rain turned into a torrential downpour. The big shots bolted for their cars, seeking shelter from the storm, but I stood my ground, shouting for everyone to head home. By the time we gathered our things, a full-blown hurricane had hit, tossing lighter objects around like they were toys. People were getting hurt, and those who weren't were rushing to help the injured into their cars, racing to the city hospital. I joined in, grabbing one of the workers who had broken his leg and helping him into my pickup. "Hey, how are you holding up?" I asked as we drove, but visibility was nearly zero. The windshield wiper struggled to keep up with the downpour, and I focused intently on the road ahead. "We should have listened to you," the poor guy grimaced. "But you know how it is, everyone needs money." "Yeah, some people abuse their power to keep workers in line," I replied. Chuck was the one calling the shots, and I knew he had moved to our town a few years back to run his business. Mayor Stuart Drake, who turned out to be some distant relative of his, supported him wholeheartedly, even if it meant bending safety regulations. Chuck had already built a large supermarket in town, which many residents appreciated for the variety it offered and the jobs it created. Now, he wanted to build a factory on the outskirts of town to produce wool products, taking advantage of the nearby farms where locals raised sheep and goats. One of those farms happened to belong to my parents. But let's return to that stormy day. My truck was nearly at the town limits when a tree suddenly fell right in front of us. I slammed the brakes just in time to avoid a collision, but now we were stranded, needing to find another route. Turning back to take a detour was going to take too long, so I decided it would be faster to walk to the nearest house and ask for a ride. "Hang in there," I encouraged Clark, who was groaning in pain as we made our way down the deserted streets. There wasn't a car in sight, and the rain pelted down relentlessly. The first house we approached belonged to an elderly lady. Mrs. Rost Malone recognized me immediately. I had fixed her porch roof a few months back. "Oh, John. What are you doing here in this weather?" she asked, her eyes widening in surprise. "Mrs. Malone, I'm so glad to see you. One of my coworkers is hurt. Can we come inside?" "Of course. Come in, she urged, stepping aside to let us in. "What happened?" I quickly explained the situation as I helped Clark onto a chair. "I need to call the hospital and get him some help." The old woman bustled around, finding her phone and setting it down on the table beside Clark. "You boys are crazy to be out in this weather. Let me get you some towels," she said, shaking her head. As she walked away, I turned to Clark, who was breathing heavily, his face pale. "Just hang in there, man. Help is on the way." "I appreciate it, John," he replied, forcing a smile despite the pain. "I guess Chuck didn't think this through, huh?" "Not even a little," I said, feeling anger bubble up again. I couldn't believe the way Chuck treated us, like we were expendable. "Just remember, once we get through this storm, we can find a way to make our voices heard." Clark nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I hoped he would be alright, and as Mrs. Malone returned with towels and a warm drink, I felt a little spark of hope. Sometimes, even in the darkest storms, kindness could shine through, bringing light to the chaos around us. And with that thought, I vowed to fight for my team, no matter what it took. Once, it wasn't about the money, she genuinely needed help, and with my free time, I couldn't refuse the old lady. Mrs. Rosalind quickly offered us her couch and rushed to the kitchen to prepare some hot tea. Meanwhile, I grabbed my phone to call the hospital, but I was met with the unfortunate news that all their vehicles were occupied due to the weather. Transportation was a mess, so I dialed my friend's number, hoping he wasn't too busy to help, especially since he lived just a stone's throw away from Mrs. Rosalind's place. "How are you, John?" she asked, placing a tray with steaming cups on the table as I ended the call. Same old, same old. Lucy is still waiting for us to have grandchildren." Speaking of children, Mrs. Rosalind continued, "My friend needs help. Do you have any sticks to immobilize his leg? He's been injured for quite some time, and we need to make a splint." "Take that chair over there," she said, pointing to an old chair by the fireplace that had been collecting dust. "It's just sitting there doing nothing. And look for some bandages in the bathroom." I quickly broke a leg off the chair, picking the most suitable one, and soon Clark's leg was bandaged. But anxiety gnawed at me. Edward was late, and I still couldn't reach my wife at home. I even called her workplace, but they informed me she had already left. My worry escalated as I thought about her trying to make it home in this storm. "I heard your wife is working at the mayor's office now," Mrs. Rosalind remarked, breaking the silence. "Yes, you could say she got lucky, but her position isn't anything to boast about. She mostly deals with paperwork there. It's not a good place, John. I know you and Lucy, and now that she's with those people, it's not safe." "Oh, Mrs. Rosalind, with your prophetic warnings again. What could happen there? Almost everyone there is like family. I even have to meet the mayor myself sometimes. You're right, he's not the most pleasant guy, but what can he do to my wife?" The old lady kept trying to persuade me to convince Lucy to quit her job, but as I spotted headlights approaching, I realized Edward was finally here. He knocked on the door, and I sincerely thanked Mrs. Rosalind for her help and hospitality before I left with my friend to take the injured man to the hospital. My house was on the way, so I asked Edward to continue to the hospital alone while I stepped out, eager to check on Lucy. As I approached home, I noticed something odd. A piece of a massive sign that had once been installed across the road from our house had been blown loose by the wind and was now leaning against our door. Light flickered in the windows, and I hoped Lucy had already made it home. As I neared the entrance, the wind nearly knocked me off my feet. I could hear the branches rustling overhead, and soon enough, I was at the window, considering breaking the glass to get inside. Just as I climbed in, I heard Lucy scream in fright, and I turned to find Chuck standing in front of me, holding my baseball bat, apparently ready to fend off unwanted guests. "What's he doing here?" was the first thing that came to mind. "Lucy, I came to talk, but the door is jammed," Chuck said arrogantly. "I'm not asking you," I shot back, my voice firm. Chuck continued, his tone condescending. "But I'm the one talking. Don't forget, thanks to me, many people have jobs, including you and your little society girl. I helped her get her position where she's so high and mighty now." "Hey, you. How dare you talk about my wife like that?" I could see that Chuck had already had a good drink or two. "Lucy, why aren't you in the basement yet? What about the phone?" I asked, my concern growing. "The line must have been broken." "My phone's dead too," Lucy replied, her voice trembling. At that moment, another window shattered, hit by a falling branch. I didn't want to deal with Chuck's antics right now, my priority was my wife's safety. "We need to get to the basement and wait there until the storm passes," I ordered. I didn't expect any thanks from Chuck, I knew his character all too well. But during a disaster, everyone deserves a place in a shelter, regardless of personal grudges. While we waited for the storm to subside, Lucy explained that as soon as the storm hit, all the office workers had been sent home. Unfortunately, her car had malfunctioned and wouldn't start. At that moment, Chuck happened to be nearby and offered her a ride home. Once we arrived, he decided to stick around and discuss some work details. He generously helped himself to my bar in the living room, and by the time I finished talking to Lucy, he had already polished off a bottle of wine. Chuck wasn't great with alcohol, it hit him hard and fast. He was stumbling around, completely unconcerned that his expensive coat was now smeared with dust and dirt. I couldn't help but find his behavior amusing when he started examining the patterns of the old plaster on the walls as if they were the most fascinating art pieces. I turned on the camera on my phone and set it on a shelf to capture the moment. Lucy was busy searching for flashlights and other essentials on the shelves, completely unaware of what I was doing. I didn't know why I felt the need to record it, perhaps I thought it would be a useful reminder the next day when he inevitably started giving out ridiculous orders again. Chuck remained oblivious to the camera as he continued his whimsical antics. I walked up to him, ready to tease him a little and capture his occasionally incoherent speech on film. "Hey Chuck," I said with a smirk, "you're indeed a great man. You've done so much good for this town and its residents." He turned to me with a grin. "Yes, I am. I'm like a god around here. If it weren't for me, you'd all still be living in the Stone Age. I've created jobs for everyone." I couldn't help but roll my eyes at his drunken bravado. As I watched him prance around, spouting nonsense, I couldn't help but think that I had a perfect weapon to use against him later. As Tom stood there, struggling to comprehend the scene unfolding before him, he couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal hanging heavy in the air. The atmosphere in the dimly lit cellar was suffocating, the scent of cheap wine mixing with the tension that crackled like static electricity. Chuck, with his obnoxious bravado, was holding court, flinging around praise for himself like confetti while deriding everyone else as if they were mere insects beneath his boot. "Just look at this place," he declared, turning to the shelf and grabbing another bottle of wine. "You don't mind if I help myself, do you?" He flashed a toothy grin and took a long swig, the wine dribbling down his chin as he savored the taste. "You need it more than I do," he continued, slurring his words, as he swayed slightly on his feet. The way he looked down at everyone, eyes half closed, only fueled Tom's growing ire. With each boastful word, Chuck's contempt for the others seeped through. "Most of these folks are just untalented sheep," he sneered. "Without me, they'd be plucking grass to feed their families." His laughter echoed off the stone walls, harsh and grating. Tom's stomach churned as he watched Chuck swagger around the cellar, puffing out his belly like a peacock. It made his blood boil when he found himself sidled up next to Lucy, his wife. "Oh, look here. Another little sheep I've helped," Chuck guffawed, gripping her shoulder possessively and letting his other hand wander. Tom felt the ground shift beneath him, a hot wave of rage rising in his chest. "Hey! What do you think you're doing, you idiot?" Tom shouted, his voice breaking through the drunken haze. He stormed toward Chuck, who barely registered the threat before Tom grabbed him by the collar and yanked him away from Lucy. It didn't take much effort. Chuck was swaying like a reed in the wind, and Tom sent him sprawling across the cellar floor. Chuck grumbled, trying to regain his balance as he pushed himself up. He looked between Tom and Lucy, confusion etched on his face. "What's your problem?" he slurred, his eyes narrowing. "What's wrong with you? Why are you embarrassed? You liked it, didn't you?" The realization struck Tom like a thunderbolt. "What the hell are you talking about?" he spat, turning to Lucy, who stood frozen in place. "He's just drunk, why are you even listening to him?" "Shut up, Chuck," Lucy shouted, anger flashing in her eyes. But Chuck only laughed, mocking her. "Oh, the little sheep speaks. You know, John, I even envy you," he sneered. "She knows how to play the game." Tom felt his world tilt on its axis. "What game?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. He looked back at Lucy, a flood of understanding crashing over him. She had lost her teaching job due to cutbacks and had been home, seemingly aimless, until she got a new job. Now it all made sense. "You got this job because you slept with him, didn't you?" The truth hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Lucy had been deceptive, and the betrayal cut deeper than Tom could have imagined. Anger roared through him, igniting a wildfire of emotions. Without thinking, he lunged at Chuck, who was still wearing that insufferable smirk. He grabbed him by the collar again, lifted him slightly off the ground, and delivered a hard punch to his fat face. "Say it again. I dare you." "Yes, your wife is just a society girl," Chuck replied, his voice dripping with disdain. Tom hit him again, then again, each punch fueled by a mix of pain and fury. He wanted to keep hitting him, not just for what he had done to Lucy but for the way he'd belittled everyone around him. Tom had longed for this moment, the chance to unleash his rage, and now that he had it, he didn't want to stop. When Chuck finally hung limply in his grasp, Tom shoved him to the floor, where he lay groaning. The sight of his once mighty opponent reduced to a pathetic heap only intensified Tom's rage. He kicked Chuck hard in the stomach, the satisfying thud echoing through the cellar. Turning to Lucy, who watched in horror, Tom's heart raced. "So it's true, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low and cold. Why would he lie? He approached her, anger simmering just below the surface. In that moment, she looked like a stranger to him, a woman he had shared 2 decades of his life with, and yet, here she was, revealing her true colors. He could feel the storm of emotions swirling inside him. A part of him was tempted to crush her delicate throat in that instant, imagining a twisted end to this nightmare. Lucy's eyes were wide with fear, and tears streamed down her cheeks as she stammered, struggling to find her voice. "Please, Tom," she whimpered. "I can explain." Tom was filled with an overwhelming urge to unleash his fury, to make them both pay for their betrayals. But amidst the chaos, something stopped him. He wasn't a monster, not a crazed murderer. Instead, he looked at her, realizing he no longer recognized the woman standing before him. In a moment of weakness, driven by pain, he swung his hand and slapped her hard. She stumbled back, losing her balance and hitting the edge of a shelf with a sickening thud. For a fleeting second, panic gripped him as he worried he might have gone too far. She lay there, motionless, and he felt a jolt of fear, praying she wasn't seriously hurt. Then she turned her head, groaning softly, and he exhaled in relief. Desperate to numb his pain, he staggered over to the wine shelf, pouring himself a glass. He gulped down the alcohol, hoping it would dull the ache in his heart, but it only amplified the storm of emotions swirling in his head. Chuck's mocking words echoed endlessly, drowning out any semblance of clarity. "I need to get out of here," Tom muttered to himself, fighting through the haze. The storm outside raged on, but at that moment, he didn't care. Lucy's desperate pleas not to leave fell on deaf ears. He had to escape the madness, the betrayals that left him feeling hollow. Tom stumbled toward the exit, but the door wouldn't budge. He had forgotten it was blocked from the outside. Panic set in as he remembered the window he had crawled through to enter the house. He rushed toward it, desperate for freedom, for a chance to break free from the heartache that had shattered his life. With each step, he felt the weight of his decisions, the crushing realization that the life he had built was now in ruins. And as he clambered toward the window, the storm outside mirrored the tempest within him, a chaotic whirlwind of pain, betrayal, and the desperate need for escape. Rain poured down around me like a cleansing river, as if it could wash away all the pain and disappointment I felt. Yet, when I stepped outside, I realized the storm was almost over. The clouds were beginning to part in the distance, revealing hints of blue sky. I didn't want to return to the house, though. I needed a distraction. Then I remembered that I had recently helped a worker, so I decided to head to the hospital to check on him. Upon arriving at the hospital, I was struck by the sight of numerous injured patients. I approached the nursing station and inquired about Clark Benjamin. Moments later, I found myself in his room, which had several beds. To my surprise, I noticed Edward was there too, lying on a bed with a bandaged leg. "Hey, Clark," I said, quickly greeting him before turning my attention to Edward. "What happened to you?" "Oh, I just decided to take a break," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. But then he caught sight of my gloomy demeanor. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to admit that my wife had cheated on me with Chuck, the very man I had a run-in with recently. "I just had an argument with Chuck," I finally replied, keeping my voice steady. "Oh, that guy," Edward said, his tone laced with disdain. "I had a run-in with him too, but I've got it easier, I don't work for him." "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. He was hitting on my wife. "You know what she looks like, she's quite a catch." Edward chuckled softly. "And what did he promise her? A promotion for sleeping with him?" "Exactly," I replied, my voice thick with anger. "He even offered her some high-ranking position just for a night in his bed. But when she slapped him, she came home and complained to me about him." "You didn't go after him, did you?" Edward asked, a knowing look in his eye. "I rushed to his office that same day. I swear he'd be lying in this bed if some of his goons hadn't stopped me. I managed to hit him a couple of times, but it hit me hard. My wife didn't just betray me. She didn't even fight back against that jerk. Was she really that unhappy with me?" I ran my fingers through my hair in frustration. I never said a bad word to her about staying home. In fact, I loved that she was less busy and had time to rest. I wanted her to feel good about herself. So why would she do this to me? An idea suddenly struck me. "Do you still have connections at the local TV station?" "Yeah, why?" Edward replied, curious. "I have a little plan to tarnish that scumbag's reputation," I said, rummaging through my pockets for my phone, only to remember I left it in the basement. "Looks like I'll have to run an errand first. Don't go anywhere, okay?" "Sure thing," he replied with a smirk. "I'll just be hanging out here." I made my way toward the exit, pausing briefly to check on Clark. He seemed to be doing okay. I then headed home, dreading the thought of seeing my wife and Chuck again. I needed my phone, so I made my way to the basement. When I arrived, I found it empty, but I didn't care where everyone had gone, I just needed to locate my phone. Fortunately, it was still there, but the battery was dead. I fiddled with it, managed to get it charging, and waited impatiently. Once it powered up, I decided to check the recording, fast-forwarding to the time I had spent in the house. Chuck's antics made me chuckle at times, but I noticed the recording continued even after I left. That's when I saw Lucy beginning to regain consciousness. She crawled over to Chuck and tried to wake him, but he was still out cold from the alcohol and the punches I'd given him. In a moment of anger, she grabbed a bottle of water from a nearby shelf and poured it over his face. He started to come around, and Lucy scolded him first for spilling the beans about their affair and then suggested talking to the mayor about hiring more workers to speed up the construction. Chuck agreed, adding that I might sabotage the project, which could result in everyone losing a significant amount of money. I couldn't believe my ears. Was there a conspiracy behind this construction project? What was so important about it? Listening to Lucy, I realized she wasn't as talentless as I had initially thought. If there was any kind of affair between Chuck and the mayor, she seemed to be intricately involved as well. I wanted to keep watching, but just as they continued their conversation, the recording abruptly ended, the battery had died. Frustrated, I knew I couldn't let this go. I grabbed my phone and headed back to the hospital, determined to get Edward's support and assistance in exposing whatever conspiracy was brewing. For a moment, I even stopped thinking about my wife's betrayal, only remembering it when I passed a billboard advertising a happy couple standing in front of their new home, cradling a little child. The picture stung, a cruel reminder of the joy my wife had ripped away from me. Returning to the hospital, I sought out Edward, but I didn't want to chat in his room for fear of being overheard. He agreed to hobble with me to the courtyard for a smoke. Once outside, I showed him the video and asked him to pay special attention to the end, where Chuck was conversing with my wife. "You're onto something," Edward said, his expression shifting as he absorbed the footage. He watched intently, his face growing more serious as the video unfolded. After I dealt with Chuck, Edward replayed the last segment again, his brows furrowing in thought as he pieced together the implications of what he had just seen. "There's definitely something off about this construction project," I said. "But I was there most of the time and didn't notice anything strange. The only thing I can say is that Chuck was." As I trailed off, the reality of my situation settled in. I needed to uncover the truth, not just about Chuck and Lucy, but about the entire construction project. I felt a surge of determination. Whatever it took, I was going to get to the bottom of this, and I wasn't going to let my wife's betrayal define me any longer. Edward and I were constantly on edge, piecing together the chaos around us. I asked him where he got some of the materials for the project, but he brushed off my questions like they were nothing, insisting everything was fine. "Hey, my friend," Edward said, his tone shifting to something serious. "You've given me a real puzzle here. But you're right, there's definitely some manipulation going on behind the scenes." He turned to me, his eyes glinting with determination. "Can I take this recording? I have a friend whose brother works for the FBI. I think I can get this into the right hands." I blinked in surprise. "The FBI? Isn't that a bit extreme? What if the police are involved?" "Seriously? If the mayor himself is in on this, do you really think the police will be able to touch him?" "They're all under his thumb," he replied, his voice low and full of conviction. Feeling a mixture of anger and desperation, I agreed and sent a copy of the recording to Edward's phone. But I knew it would take time for anything to unfold, and for now, I had no choice but to return home. With a burst of determination, I shoved the stand blocking the door aside. It had needed to go anyway. As I stepped inside, I was hit by the sight of Lucy, my wife, sitting on the couch with a forlorn expression. The moment she saw me, she rushed over, tears streaming down her face. "Tom," Please forgive me. I'm so sorry for the terrible mistake I made, and I regret it so much. She pleaded. Leave it, Lucy. You could have at least had the sense to tell me the moment he suggested it, I snapped, my voice thick with betrayal. You weren't happy just sitting at home, were you? You worked so hard for this job, and now you're throwing it all away? I just wanted to help our family. They pay well, Tom. She defended, her voice trembling. I slapped her, not as hard this time, just enough to make her realize how deeply she had hurt me. You're like a brainless chicken chasing after a shiny object. I tried everything to make you happy, to ensure you wanted for nothing. John, please. She started, but I waved her off and went to inspect the damage done to our home while the elements had raged outside. Luckily, the house hadn't sustained too much damage, just a few broken windows. I set to work boarding them up, determined to keep out any intruders, be they animals or thugs. I didn't tell Lucy about what I'd learned. If she got wind of it, she might inform Chuck or the mayor, making it much harder to expose their schemes. The days dragged on. I waited for news from Edward, calling him a few times and even visiting him at the hospital. He reassured me that they were on it, but Chuck wasn't as easy to deal with as I'd hoped. The thought of the investigators finding evidence of my confrontation with Chuck gnawed at me, but Edward insisted I probably wouldn't face any consequences. It might even work in my favor. Meanwhile, I continued to go to work. The maintenance crew was diligent about clearing the roads, and I was back behind the wheel of my car. But I decided to sabotage the construction, creating various malfunctions to slow things down. I kept a close eye on the workers, especially when Chuck was around. To my surprise, during all this time, Chuck never brought up what had happened in my basement. He avoided deeper conversations and only spoke to me when necessary. Part of me expected him to fire me, but for some reason, he didn't. Perhaps he was worried I might expose his affair with Lucy, but I was content to wait and see what Edward would find out. As for Lucy, I tried to limit my interactions with her. I wanted to kick her out of the house so she could fend for herself, but where could she go? Her parents had long passed, and she didn't have any siblings. Of course, she could turn to Chuck, but I'd heard he had some sort of partner now, even if they weren't officially married. I figured it was better to keep her close, one of the players in this twisted game. Much to my surprise, Lucy continued going to work, even after everything that happened. I had expected her to quit, but it seemed she was determined to stick around. Finally, the long-awaited moment arrived. Edward called me one evening after I returned from work and asked me to turn on the news. My heart raced as I followed his instructions, quickly finding myself glued to the television. The news anchor was reporting that a certain Chuck Valentine had been arrested for construction fraud. As the story unfolded, it revealed several safety protocol violations and the use of substandard materials containing toxic substances that could pose long-term health risks. Alongside this revelation, they aired footage of the mayor being arrested as well, his involvement in Chuck's schemes now fully exposed. I felt a rush of elation, turning to Edward and providing him with that recording had been worth it. But just as I was about to revel in my victory, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I was met by several police officers and two men in sharp suits who introduced themselves as FBI agents. My heart dropped as I wondered if they were there for me, given the recording of my outburst with Chuck. But to my relief, they inquired about Lucy, explaining that they were there for her. She was involved in the operation, you see. Chuck didn't make her a secretary for nothing, one of the agents explained. He and the mayor educated her quickly. She falsified reports to hide the documents that could expose their deception, all for a decent reward. I felt a mix of dread and anger. She's in the kitchen preparing dinner, I told them. As they headed toward the kitchen, one of the agents returned, his face pale. She's gone. She escaped through the window. Panic erupted as police officers scattered in different directions to catch her. I stood frozen, realizing that the storm was just beginning. What had I unleashed? Welcome back to our channel. Don't forget to subscribe to Cheating Stories Best so you don't miss any new episodes. In our first story today, we witness a shocking twist where a wife's reckless actions lead to her arrest. As we dive into our second story, prepare for a roller coaster of emotions. I'm a 35-year-old guy, and I've been married to my wife, Ellie, who's 34, for 5 wonderful years. We're just a typical couple balancing our work during the week and enjoying our weekends together. However, things have taken an unexpected turn over the last 3 months. Let's jump in. 3 months ago, on an otherwise ordinary Sunday afternoon, Ellie surprised me by showing me pictures of her friends and asking me to rate them. I was taken aback at first, but she insisted it was just a fun little game. So, I decided to go along with it, making sure to clarify that I didn't mean anything by my ratings. As we laughed and joked, I felt relaxed, and Ellie reassured me it was all in good fun. But then, I ended up giving the highest rating to her friend, Lily, who was 33. Lily had been Ellie's gym partner before they became friends, and the 3 of us had hung out a few times. Out of nowhere, Ellie asked, "Would you sleep with Lily if you had the chance?" My jaw dropped. I quickly reminded her that this was all just a game, that there was no deeper meaning behind my ratings. I could see the glimmer of mischief in her eyes, but she assured me she wasn't jealous. In fact, she encouraged me, saying that if I found Lily attractive, it would be better to explore that openly rather than sneak around behind her back. I was stunned and stammered, "I don't find Lily attractive. She's just better looking than most of your friends." I know it sounds shallow, but I thought it was all part of the game. For the next few days, Ellie insisted I should explore this casual encounter with Lily, claiming that if I had any attraction to her, it would be healthier to address it rather than cheat. I stood my ground, telling her I had no intention of sleeping with Lily and that I had never viewed her that way. But Ellie didn't seem convinced. A few days later, we found ourselves at a house party at Lily and Joshua's place, along with just the 4 of us. We grew bored with the games and decided to watch a movie. Somehow, we landed on 2+2, a film about couples swapping partners to rekindle excitement in their relationships. After the movie, fueled by a bit too much alcohol, we exchanged glances, wondering if we should try something similar. Thankfully, we laughed it off and moved on, but the experience lingered in the back of my mind. As the work week rolled around, Ellie brought up our movie night during a casual dinner conversation. She hinted that perhaps we should consider trying couple swapping, and I chuckled, thinking she was joking. However, my laughter turned to disbelief when she insisted she was serious. I asked if she had someone specific in mind, and she mentioned Joshua and Lily. I stared at her in shock, unable to fathom how she could be serious. I explained that pursuing this idea would only harm both our families, but she nodded, admitting she hadn't meant it seriously. She explained that the movie had sparked the thought, and she assumed it would pass. I tried to brush it off, but as time went on, Ellie persisted in suggesting we spice up our marriage. I understood that after 7 years together, the thrill can fade, but that's a natural part of marriage, exchanging excitement for stability, love, and care. I even straightforwardly asked her if she was open to a non-exclusive relationship, but she flatly declined, saying her suggestion was meant to strengthen our connection. Weeks went by, but Ellie remained insistent. She constantly dropped hints about getting close to Lily. One evening, she returned from the gym, practically glowing with excitement. "You won't believe it. I talked to Lily about your interest," she gushed. My heart sank. I asked why she would discuss this with Lily, and she explained that it was common for women to chat about such things with friends. I was more old-fashioned. I'd never discuss my feelings about another woman with my friends, especially not the intimate details about my wife. She went on to say that she had told Lily I found her attractive, and to my surprise, Lily blushed. Ellie beamed with pride. I shrugged it off, telling her it was normal for anyone to blush when learning they were considered attractive. But Ellie suggested that maybe Lily was also interested in exploring a relationship with me. Honestly, something felt off. I decided to dig a little deeper, checking Ellie's phone and social media accounts for any signs of impropriety. Everything seemed clean, aside from some spam messages from an unknown number. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me for doubting Ellie. She had always been cheerful and open, never one to hold back, and that was one of the things I loved about her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pushed into something I wasn't ready for. Since Ellie started encouraging me to get close to Lily, I realized I had been treating her poorly. My mind raced with conflicting emotions, anger, confusion, and a growing sense of betrayal. Just when I thought I was beginning to understand what Ellie wanted, she turned the tables on me again. One afternoon, as we were cleaning up after lunch, she said casually, "You know, if you and Lily ever did decide to explore something, I wouldn't mind. It could be fun for all of us." My heart dropped. "Are you serious? Ellie, this isn't some game. This is our marriage we're talking about." She laughed lightly, brushing it off as if it were nothing, but I could tell she was serious. I didn't know if it was the wine talking or if she really meant what she said. I had to confront this head on. "Look, I love you, and I want to be with you, but this isn't how I envision our future. I can't just casually swap partners like it's a game." Ellie paused, her playful demeanor fading as she saw the weight of my words. "I just thought it might be exciting, that we could explore something new together," she replied softly, her expression shifting from playful to contemplative. As the days turned into weeks, I struggled with the pressure Ellie was putting on me. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the solution to our problems. I started to notice changes in our dynamic. Ellie seemed distant, almost preoccupied. One evening, I came home to find her on the couch, her phone in hand, scrolling through pictures of Lily and Joshua. The sight made my stomach turn. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice tinged with frustration. "I was just looking at their vacation photos," she replied casually, but I could sense something deeper. I felt the walls closing in. "Are you thinking about them? About what you suggested?" She bit her lip, hesitating before answering. "I don't know, maybe. It just feels like we're stuck in a rut, you know?" I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. "Ellie, we can find other ways to reconnect. We don't have to open our marriage to feel excitement again." "I know, but it's just a thought. What if it could work? What if it could be fun?" She countered, her eyes searching mine for understanding. It hit me then, this wasn't just about desire, it was about fear. Fear of losing each other, fear of monotony, fear of what might happen if we didn't find a way to keep the spark alive. "Ellie," I said firmly but gently, "I love you. I want us to work through this together, but we have to do it the right way. Not by risking everything we've built." We both fell silent, the weight of our conversation hanging in the air. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, and I knew this was a pivotal moment for both of us. It was time to dig deep and confront the truth of our feelings, rather than dancing around the edges of temptation and uncertainty. As we sat there, the reality of our situation became clear. It wasn't about trading partners or testing boundaries, it was about finding our way back to each other, about reigniting the passion and connection that had brought us together in the first place. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew one thing for sure: I was ready to fight for my marriage, to reclaim the love we had nurtured over the years. As I looked into Ellie's eyes, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could navigate this together, hand in hand, learning and growing along the way. And just like that, our journey was far from over, it was only just beginning. I stared at my phone, feeling a wave of self-loathing wash over me. I had treated Ellie unkindly, convinced she loved me so much that she would let me be with someone else. It was a bizarre thought, but I felt fortunate that she was open-minded enough to consider such an arrangement. Over the next month, we started hanging out regularly with Joshua and Lily, whether it was grabbing drinks, enjoying dinners, or hosting gatherings at our homes. It all felt pretty standard. Yet, something unusual was brewing beneath the surface. As we spent time together, I found myself developing a strong attraction to Lily. There were a few reasons for this. Whenever we were all together, Ellie would tease me playfully, and sometimes Joshua would chime in, leaving Lily blushing and maintaining intense eye contact with me. Honestly, who wouldn't feel a little fluttery in that situation? But every time the topic arose, I made it perfectly clear that I had no intention of getting involved with Lily. Now, I'm in a bit of a conundrum. We have a long weekend coming up due to a Friday bank holiday, and Ellie and Lily have already made plans for a getaway at a beach resort. We've taken trips like this with Joshua and Lily before, but this time felt different. Ellie insisted that I develop a closer connection with Lily during the vacation. I firmly declined, but she argued that we could always back off if things became uncomfortable. I worried about how it would feel if she got hurt or possessive about it, and Ellie countered that we wouldn't truly understand ourselves until we gave it a try. This conflict left me torn. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued, but I was equally anxious. What if this arrangement harmed our marriage? Ellie insisted it would strengthen our bond, claiming that this kind of situation was more common than I realized, even if people rarely discussed it openly. I was confused about how all of this worked, so I sought advice from friends who had ventured into similar territory. Was it truly a good idea to invite a third person into our relationship? Then it hit me, Ellie was indeed cheating on me. After some soul-searching, I decided to go along with her plans and see where this would lead. I definitely didn't want to have intimacy with Lily, but I put on a facade in front of Ellie, pretending I was open to giving it a shot. I wanted to see how this would unfold once I agreed. Ellie was overjoyed that I finally relented. On the planned weekend, the four of us drove to a resort about 60 miles away. During the journey, while Ellie and Joshua reveled in the beautiful scenery, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily seemed distant and nervous throughout the trip. I wasn't feeling great either, but I forced myself to act like everything was fine. I had no concrete evidence to suggest something was off, it was just a gut feeling gnawing at me. We arrived at the resort Friday afternoon. The plan was to soak up the sun until evening, attend a party organized by the resort, and later explore our wildest desires. Everything was set up for Lily and me to connect. After freshening up, we enjoyed a sumptuous lunch and spent the rest of the afternoon lounging in the sun. I tried to have a private conversation with Lily, but she brushed off my concerns, smirking and saying she was looking forward to the night. The party got pretty wild, and I made an effort to stay composed, anticipating the next step. Sensing my unease, Joshua reassured me everything was fine and insisted that Lily just wanted to have a good time with me because she was attracted to my physique. Now that I know the truth, I feel disgusted by his manipulation. I lost track of time at the party, and suddenly I found myself in a room with Lily. We both sat there, feeling awkward, and I had no idea how much time had passed. Finally, Lily broke the silence and asked how we should proceed. I hesitated, questioning whether we truly needed to go down this path. She gave me a puzzled look. "Do you genuinely want to be close with me?" I asked. To my astonishment, she admitted to having a small crush on me but had never seriously considered being intimate until Joshua planted the idea in her head. I could sense something was off, so I probed deeper. I was shocked to learn that she had been manipulated just as I had been. It all started when Ellie shared a game where I rated Lily the highest. Ellie had also mentioned to Lily that we were looking for ways to add excitement to our marriage. The day Joshua came home and expressed how lucky he felt to have such an attractive wife, he casually mentioned that even I found Lily appealing. Lily thought I had confided this to Joshua, but in reality, it was Ellie who spilled the beans. It felt orchestrated. Ever since, Joshua had been feeding this idea to Lily. He had asked her if she'd be interested in being close with me. She had refused multiple times, but he insisted it would spice up their relationship and strengthen it. Lily confessed she found my physique appealing but not enough to want to take things further. I made it clear I had no intention of pursuing her. As I shared my side of the story, her eyes widened in shock, All she had known until that moment was that I desired her. At that point, we both realized it was a scheme cooked up by our spouses. Lily confronted Joshua, asking him if he and Ellie planned to do something similar. He denied it, claiming he wanted Lily to experience it first and would consider it if things went well. I distinctly remember not talking to Ellie that night because I had no desire to be part of this twisted game. I told her I suspected she was cheating when she pushed for this hookup. I checked her phone, but it was clean. Now, we both knew it was time to uncover the truth behind their manipulations. I had a gnawing feeling in my gut that demanded confrontation, but Lily insisted we needed to catch them in the act first. So, on the night we were supposed to be hooking up, we devised a plan to catch Ellie and Joshua outside. We figured they wouldn't risk anything at that point, especially since we had the option to back out. When we stepped outside, we found them huddled together, engrossed in something on an iPad. They looked cozy, their bodies almost touching, and for a moment, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. We approached and told them we'd changed our minds, that we didn't want to go through with the plan. Their disappointment was palpable as they asked why. I mumbled something about it not feeling right, and they didn't have much to say in response. I added that I had a last-minute client meeting the following day, so we had to leave early. I suggested Ellie continue the evening with Lily and Joshua, but none of them seemed keen to stay longer. The drive home the next morning was suffocatingly silent, filled with unspoken tension. Once we got back, I quickly changed and then left the house, my mind racing. I felt like I needed to clear my head, so I drove to a coffee shop about an hour away. It was during that time, as I sipped my coffee, that Lily called, telling me Joshua had also left the house, citing some urgent work. We both knew what that work involved. Lily mentioned that she'd asked a mutual friend to tail Joshua and would keep me posted on their whereabouts. Unsurprisingly, they were spotted at my house before I left. I had told Lily I'd be home late in the evening, and it seemed they couldn't let this opportunity slip by. My anger boiled over as I drove back, intent on catching them in the act. When I unlocked the apartment, I was greeted by the sight of them sprawled together on the bed, completely naked. My heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions crashing down on me. Lily was quick to pull out her phone and snap photos as they fumbled to cover themselves. Without a moment's hesitation, I stormed into the room, furious and ready to confront them. I grabbed Ellie's belongings, throwing them out of the apartment and demanding that she leave immediately. They both pleaded with us, desperate to explain. Joshua kept insisting that they were merely experimenting, just like we had the night before. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed him by the collar, my fists clenched in rage, and demanded to know when he had started sleeping with my wife. Ellie tried to intervene, but I pushed her aside, my fury directed solely at Joshua. He claimed it was just a one-time thing, a way to explore new boundaries in their relationship. My anger surged, tightening my grip on him as I gritted my teeth, determined to get a confession. I turned my furious gaze toward Ellie, making it clear that I wouldn't hesitate to go to jail for dealing with this parasite if she didn't come clean. Eventually, after much sobbing and pleading, they confessed. They had been having an affair for over a year. My mind reeled as I processed the implications. I thought back to how some of my friends had seen them together but hadn't said anything. They had been living in fear of exposure, and in a desperate move, they concocted a plan to drag us into a couple swap to legitimize their cheating. "How is it that your phone was clean when I checked it?" I demanded, my voice thick with disbelief. Ellie cried as she explained that they only communicated via email, using it to coordinate their secret meetings. It was all so cold, so calculated. Their relationship had been purely physical, a twisted deception masquerading as something more. Lily, who had been silently observing the whole ordeal, decided to leave the house, unable to stomach what she had just heard. Joshua, in a feeble attempt to salvage something, followed her. I turned my attention back to Ellie, who was still pleading with me, tears streaming down her face. I told her to get out, that reconciliation wasn't an option. She tried to hug me, but I pushed her away, refusing to let her manipulate me further. It wasn't until I threatened to involve her parents that she finally left. After she was gone, I messaged Lily, asking her to send me the photos she had taken of Ellie and Joshua. I forwarded those damning images to Ellie's sister and laid everything bare for her. When I called, her sister confirmed that Ellie hadn't gone to stay with their parents. About a week later, I emailed Ellie the divorce papers. I didn't even know where she was living anymore, so I had the lawyer send a physical copy to her parents' house. It wasn't long before they called me, panicking. I had included Ellie's sister in the call, asking her to share all the details about the divorce and the evidence I had uncovered. As expected, Ellie began bombarding me with pleas for reconciliation, but the frequency of her messages skyrocketed after she received the email. Meanwhile, Lily's parents were devastated when they found out about the affair. They apologized to me profusely and promised to counsel their daughter. Deciding to cut off all communication with Ellie was liberating. I focused on moving forward, even though the divorce process was excruciating. Eventually, it was finalized, and I started rebuilding my life, grateful for the unwavering support from friends, especially Lily, who stood by me through the storm. I learned some hard lessons about trust, communication, and the importance of setting boundaries in relationships. Joshua, who managed one of my father's business units, lost his job when the affair came to light. Lily's father used his connections to sabotage Joshua's prospects, ensuring he wouldn't easily recover from this betrayal. Now, a month has passed since that devastating day. The divorce proceedings are still ongoing, with Ellie contesting it and demanding a share of my house. I'm still reeling from the betrayal and the way they tried to drag us into their twisted game. If there are any further developments, I'll keep you updated. But if not, consider this the final update. I know some of you are concerned, but I'm taking it one day at a time, determined to emerge stronger from this ordeal. You might have thought that Lily and I would end up together after everything we went through, but that didn't happen. As I mentioned before, neither of us wanted that connection, we were both manipulated into it, but thankfully, we managed to break free just in time. My divorce has been finalized, and Ellie didn't walk away with a single penny. My lawyer argued fiercely, stating that if she tried to claim a share of the property, we would revisit the divorce terms and demand alimony due to the emotional distress she caused me. Let me tell you, when you pay your lawyers well, they can negotiate some pretty favorable outcomes. In the end, Ellie gave up and signed the papers. You might remember that Joshua was working at his father-in-law's company. Well, after all the revelations, he was shown the door. It was tough for him to find a decent-paying job in his field after he left my house. Meanwhile, Ellie rented a shabby little apartment and invited Joshua to stay with her, but he declined. He was afraid of further repercussions from his father-in-law and admitted he never loved her. Ellie had been living under the illusion that Joshua loved her, but that was never the case. Joshua made it clear that their relationship was just for fun, without any emotional attachment, just as they had agreed from the beginning. These revelations came to light during Lily's divorce proceedings, where Joshua confessed that he had been manipulated by Ellie all along and that his true feelings lay with Lily. He pleaded with Lily and her father for another chance, but they turned him down and insisted on the divorce. I can't lie, seeing my ex-wife exposed and humiliated in court felt like justice served. She deserved every bit of it. She was abandoned by everyone, her husband, her lover, her friends, and even her family. Her parents and siblings turned their backs on her. As for her current job situation, I can't say for sure, but word travels fast, and I doubt she can maintain her previous lifestyle on her current income. She risked a stable relationship for a fleeting thrill and ended up getting exactly what she deserved. To cope with everything, I've started attending counseling. I've been grappling with disturbing thoughts about that night Ellie planned for my hookup. Therapy is slowly helping me move forward, but I know it'll take time to rid myself of her memory completely. My friends keep suggesting I should start dating again, but honestly, I don't think I'm ready to dive back into the dating scene just yet. That was our second story for today. Now, let's move on to the next one, which promises to be just as interesting. I'm not proud of my actions, and I do believe that karma will catch up with me someday. It's somewhat embarrassing for someone like me, who has achieved a level of success, to admit to such petty behavior. I'm 26 years old, and I had an incredible friend for 2 years who eventually asked me out. Let's call him Jaden. We connected on a deep emotional level, and there was something about him that made me fall head over heels. For a year, we maintained a long-distance relationship, and it felt incredibly serious to me. Jaden is the kind of guy who just goes with the flow, some might call him laid back. I got into a routine of helping him financially, and I did it willingly. I covered his mechanic bills once and bought groceries for his family a few times because they were going through a tough time. He always seemed to live without a care in the world. I playfully asked him once, "What would you do if I stopped paying for your food?" He just shrugged and said, "Eat less, or maybe nothing at all." Despite living 3 hours apart, everything seemed fine. We visited each other frequently, and I thought our relationship was solid. But then everything changed. I learned from his sister that he had been communicating with other women while we were together. When I confronted him, Jaden denied it, refusing to take responsibility. He claimed I was the only one on his mind and that his sister was just making things up. I wanted to believe him because I loved him, but 3 weeks ago, a mutual friend dropped a bombshell. He had been seeing another woman in his town and getting close to her. When I confronted him again, he shifted the blame onto me. "You know it's hard for me to control myself. You've been neglecting me. You should understand that the distance is tough." That was a twisted interpretation of reality. During our time apart, I visited him every other weekend when I could afford it, and we communicated daily. He accused me of not wanting him to live with me, which was true, but I had my reasons. I didn't want to support a grown man and pay his bills. I felt utterly devastated, especially when Jaden told me he loved me and was willing to do anything to make our relationship work, only to cut off contact the very next day. I confided in my friends, who revealed that the girl he had gotten involved with was just a laid-back woman who had been around town for a while. To be honest, that stung even more. Let's call her Destiny, the name seems fitting. They also informed me that he had started seeing her the day after our last conversation, maybe even before. I stood by Jaden during his toughest moments, at his lowest point in life, only for him to cheat on me with the least reputable woman in town, repeatedly lie about it, and give me false hope as if I were a gullible fool. Then he vanished. Without any explanation, I found myself seeking cheap thrills. This led me to endure the embarrassment of scheduling a gynecologist appointment for an STD check. Why should I blame myself? I hadn't betrayed anyone. Just 2 weeks ago, still wrestling with my heartbreak, I reactivated my Facebook account and spent hours scrolling through the profiles of my ex and his new girlfriend. Deep down, I knew it wasn't a healthy way to cope, but I couldn't resist the pull of curiosity. Rather than focusing on their flirty messages, I became obsessed with her profile. I scrolled through months of cringeworthy selfies taken in dimly lit, dingy bathrooms, often with minimal clothing, photos that would make even someone with loose morals blush with embarrassment. Then, in a moment of weakness, I did something I'm not proud of. Please don't judge me, I was in a bad place. I created a fake profile of a handsome guy who had attended her school. In less than a day, I befriended her friends, posted fake updates, and added her as a friend. It was astonishing how many people accepted friend requests on Facebook simply based on appearance, regardless of whether they knew the person or not. In just 2 hours, I amassed 40 friends, and friend requests kept rolling in every few minutes. I couldn't help but wonder who was more pathetic, me, for concocting this elaborate ruse, or these people who were so easily deceived. The following day, I began chatting with her. To my surprise, she was remarkably open, even sending me photos of herself in some rather revealing outfits, all to a complete stranger, without asking for anything in return. As a woman myself, I found it all too easy to tell her what she wanted to hear. Within 2 or 3 days, Destiny was pouring her heart out to me about her relationship problems with Jaden. Yes, you read that right. I suggested we meet up so I could show her what it was like to be with a real man. By this point, I had saved hours of our conversations, including the most scandalous innuendos I'd ever come across, along with pictures and voice messages. It felt like time to put my plan into action. Meanwhile, as all of this unfolded, Jaden began reaching out to me, admitting that his actions were a mistake. I asked him if he and Destiny had broken up, and he falsely claimed they hadn't, twice. Despite knowing the truth, I felt no heartbreak. Instead, I reassured him that I still loved him, was willing to forgive and forget, and even wanted him to move in with me. His enthusiasm was palpable. He declared he'd give his 2 weeks' notice at work. Later that day, he texted me to say he'd left his job abruptly because he didn't think it was worth it. He said he would pack his things and come over later that week. I was aware that karma would eventually catch up with me, but this felt like my way of getting revenge. I posted all our conversations on the fake profile, tagged Destiny, and shared the pictures and videos purely for my own amusement. Then, I sat back and watched the drama unfold before I deactivated the fake account. I received 53 likes and 82 messages. Her friends and family all witnessed it. Jaden saw it too, and coincidentally messaged me right away, saying, "Hey babe, just wanted to say that I miss you so much. Can't wait to be with you again." He didn't even mention anything about Destiny. Little did he know that I was more informed than he realized. Friday rolled around, and he told me he was heading to my apartment. It's worth mentioning that I had recently moved, so when Jaden was on his way, he didn't know my new address. I suggested we meet at a nearby CVS so I could guide him to my place. Classic Jaden. He responded, "Sure, but I'm running low on gas. Can you fill up my tank? Don't forget your credit card." In my forgiving nature, I agreed and told him I'd do it once he arrived. Soon, I received a text saying he was at CVS and asking for my whereabouts. I deliberately ignored it. 30 minutes later, he started blowing up my phone like an aggressive telemarketer from an overseas call center. I ignored his calls, letting it ring once so he knew I was sending it to voicemail. An hour passed, and he left a voicemail, expressing concern. "Hey babe, I'm worried about you. Are you okay?" I was more than okay. After another 2 hours, he informed me that he was stranded. He drove to another CVS, thinking I'd be there, and ran out of gas. Now, he was stuck at a gas station with all his stuff in the car. Still, I ignored his calls. I thought it was the perfect time to get some sleep, but my excitement kept me awake, so I took an Ambien and hit the hay. Saturday morning came, and it looked like a phone apocalypse had occurred. I glanced at my phone and saw 37 text messages, 28 missed calls, and 7 voicemails, all from one person. Guess who? Unfortunately, I can't share the voicemails, but I can tell you that eventually, Jaden had to call his mom to come and get him. After that, I blocked his number and changed mine because he began calling me from his family's phone. Despite all the blocked calls, I received a message from his sister, the same one who had previously told me about his affair. She was eager to fill me in on the aftermath. Jaden's mom and sister returned home with him, Jaden sobbing his heart out while their mom was furious. Ironically, she wasn't upset about his cheating, she was livid with me for what I had done to her precious son. His sister made sure to reassure me, saying I was strong and deserved someone better than her deceitful brother. I acknowledged that I had acted impulsively throughout this ordeal, likely tarnishing Destiny's reputation within her social circle. I'm considering reactivating the fake profile to apologize or something, but I'm undecided. It's worth noting that Destiny had no idea about my deception, and while I felt guilty about what I had done, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of satisfaction. After all, I had taken control of my pain and turned it into something that brought me a bit of joy, even if it was at the expense of someone else's reputation. But was this truly revenge, or just a desperate grasp at validation? The answer eluded me as I stared at my phone, contemplating my next move. Knowing Elle was involved with a guy who already had a girlfriend, only to seduce him and then cheat on him herself, really stirs the pot, doesn't it? I'd love to hear what you think about this situation. The wildest part is, Elle has no clue it was me, the random guy who exposed her actions. I made a conscious choice not to share those incriminating pictures publicly. I only showed them to my ex, who already knew it was her. But to everyone else, no one has made the connection, and I've worked hard to keep it that way. I was careful through the whole process. Sure, I lost my ex, Jaden, in the chaos, but I don't want him back. I know it might sound a little crazy, but I still have lingering feelings for him. He's in a rough spot now, jobless and with the whole town buzzing about his business. A part of me regrets everything that went down and secretly hopes for a reconciliation, but a bigger part of me feels relieved that I've closed the door on that possibility. We both know it wouldn't have worked out in the long run anyway. It feels so liberating to finally get all of this off my chest. Thank you for letting me share. What did you all think of our stories today? Honestly, the second one really gripped me. There was something about it that just hooked me in. I'd love to know which story you found most intriguing. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.